Hello everyone and welcome to Smart World with CNBC. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans Smart World avec CNBC, votre émission 100% bilingue en anglais et en français. We're together to have another view of the greatest business moments of CNBC. At the top of this program, l'information exclusive de CNBC, Airbnb préparerait une introduction en bourse pour décembre, les dernières informations sur l'état du président Donald Trump et le plan de relance imminent aux États-Unis. C'est parti, let's go! Airbnb plans to go public in December. Information de CNBC. Airbnb cherche à lever environ 3 milliards de dollars pour son introduction en bourse. Le plan actuel de la société est de rendre son dossier public en novembre après l'élection présidentielle américaine et viser une introduction en bourse en décembre.
Hey, Sarah. According to a source familiar with the company's plans, Airbnb is aiming to go public in December or even a little bit earlier and planning to raise around $3 billion in an IPO. Reuters first reporting that development not long ago. Of course, guys, much of those plans rest on market conditions, but notably, the aim is to go not too long after the presidential election. I'm also told by a source that an IPO could value the startup at about $30 billion, which would be a major step up from that valuation that it fetched earlier this year of $18 billion. And that, of course, was a step down from its previous funding round of more than $30 billion. And this is really reflective of the recovery that we have seen from Airbnb this year. Of course, its business, its bookings just fell through when the pandemic hit, but it has really benefited from travel in a post-COVID world, seeing that recovery more so than traditional hotels. Back to you.
That's really interesting, Dean. Clearly lots of money out there, as we've seen with the SPAC craze. So raising a fresh $3 billion, 10% of the float. We'll definitely keep an eye on any more developments there. Dee Bosa, thank you.
Airbnb sera l'une des cotations boursières américaines les plus importantes et les plus attendues de 2020. Selon les informations de CNBC, la société pourrait atteindre une valorisation de plus de 30 milliards de dollars. Does President Trump's diagnosis pose national security risks? Le Pentagone a agi rapidement pour rassurer les Américains. L'incertitude autour de la santé du président présente un défi évident, especially for those charged with protecting the U.S. from foreign and domestic threats.
Let's turn to Sue Gordon now, former Deputy Director of National Intelligence under President Trump. Sue, you know what it's like inside the White House when there's an emergency. Give us an idea. What are the protocols?
I would say your previous contributors captured it well. One, it's small. Two, it will be purposeful but urgent, and everyone running around doing their job to make sure that they're aligned, to make sure that their responsibility can run smoothly.
Bad actors often look to exploit moments of perceived weaknesses. I'm certain that the Pentagon is preparing for every sort of potential eventuality. What might our adversaries in Russia and China and Iran and North Korea be thinking and doing? Is there the possibility of more aggression as a result of this?
Yeah, they're certainly going to be interested, right? They're going to be watching. Leadership following is one of the things that you do. Certainly the leader of the United States and the free world. So this is going to be an interesting moment. They're going to be launching their collection systems to try and get independent confirmation of information, right? They're going to believe that there is something more that's being shared. Closed systems tend not to believe open systems. So, their diplomatic missions, their intelligence services, they're going to be trying to get information about the president that is not publicly available. Mm-hmm. Do I expect mischief right now? No, but they are going to be preparing and trying to see what's going on.
Of course. We have received notice from some of those adversaries. Kim Jong-un in North Korea sent out a statement wishing the president well. Early going in Moscow, we got from Vladimir Putin as well. Not two sources that you trust too terribly much. But anytime there is uncertainty and indecision in the most powerful office in all the world, there's certainly reason for the most powerful military to be paying good attention.
Right. You're going to expect that our institutions, the Department of State, their diplomats are going to be reaching out to their counterparts and our allies. The Department of Defense, same thing. you know, what's important about this and what's awesome about it is this is one of the things that makes the United States special. Is kind of this orderly transfer of power. The Constitution actually defines what you do in moments like this, and the power is in the office, not in the human. And so our system is actually pretty well designed for the notion of dealing with this sort of moment. Right now, it's not in play, but if it became so, the 25th Amendment is something to tell us what to do. So this is one of the elements of strength of our system, which is why when our candidates talk about an election that might be illegitimate or we're not sure that it's going to be transferred, those moments kind of undermine us. But right now, you're seeing the strength of the U.S. system.
Selon Jonathan Hoffman, assistant du secrétaire à la Défense, indique dans un communiqué que, je cite, « Le commandement national n'est en aucun cas affecté par cette annonce ». Selon Sue Gordon, les autorités sont actuellement sur le qui-vive et se préparent à contrôler les ingérences étrangères. Donald Trump s'est souvent présenté sans masque aux conférences de presse. According to White House reporters, multiple high-profile White House officials were not wearing masks when addressing the media. Yamiche Alcindor, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, discusses the latest.
Yamiche, I'm very curious about what the behind the scenes was of how the president would get from the White House to the helicopter and to the hospital. He is one who enjoys stagecraft and believes that the visual message is extremely important. And I wonder if you have any behind the scenes on how that went down.
Well, we know that the president walked out of the White House in front of cameras. He did not speak to reporters, but he waved. And that, as we know, the president is someone who understands optics, so obviously he wanted to be seen. He then released a video a short time after arriving in Walter Reed that was filmed before he left the White House. And there he's saying that he is in good spirits, that he is essentially wanting to project the idea that he's healthy, that he's still in command. There have been real questions today whether or not the president could continue to be working, but the White House insists that he's moving to Walter Reed out of an abundance of caution and that he can still be working from there. There are White House officials today who are saying that he was working from the White House, even though the president's entire calendar was cleared today. And of course, he's part of that risk group as a 75-year-old overweight man. But I think in particular, the president was very cognizant of the optics. So what we saw was the president walk out of the White House on cameras and remain on cameras. When he got to Walter Reed, we saw him get out of SUV and walk into the building.
Getting anything out of the White House today, I know that there weren't a lot of people in there. My friends who are correspondents there were all tested, and I'm happy to report that at least the ones I know were tested negative. But we know 3 journalists tested positive. Do you know anything about them or anything else about what was happening in the White House today?
I know that the journalists that tested positive, many of them were, at least a number of them were at the briefing on Sunday with the president. And these are White House correspondents, of course, that have close quarters. The White House is not a very big place. The place where reporters are is a pretty close quarters. We don't have
it's extremely close quarters.
It's extremely, I think for people who haven't been at the White House, it might be lost on people just how close we are. I sometimes, especially before the pandemic, would sit shoulder to shoulder, back to back with reporters. Now there's been some social distancing where you'll have maybe a chair's length between 2 reporters, but we're not talking about a long distance. Reporters, of course, have been wearing masks and trying to social distance as much as possible, but it's scary to think about the fact that there are reporters now testing positive for the coronavirus because the quarters are so small. I myself was sitting in a booth in the basement today, so I think there are a lot of reporters who are trying to be extra cautious today and trying to remain even farther away from each other than before.
What sort of communications did the White House have through official channels with those who work in the White House? And just for a little bit of clarity, imagine a series of small closets. Not as big as a walk-in closet in the suburbs, but what one might call a walk-in closet in Manhattan, if you know what I mean. That's about the size of the booths where each network and each major newspaper works. There's one after another in the basement. It's extremely close. What kind of official communication about risk from the White House to those there today, Yamiche?
Well, today the White House was really talking about, again, washing hands, being socially distant, making sure to wear masks. The National Security Council said that all of their staff members are now going to be required to wear masks. But one of the most remarkable things that happened today while I was reporting from the White House with my mask on is that there were a number of White House officials who were speaking to reporters and taking questions without wearing facial coverings. That includes the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. That includes Larry Kudlow, the top White House economic advisor, and the White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany. Now, we did see in this hour that Mark Meadows was standing alongside President Trump when he was going into Walter Reed and making that trip, and he had a mask on then. But earlier in the day, Mark Meadows was not wearing a mask. So it goes to show you that this is the White House, even in the midst of this outbreak and people coming up positive, top officials in our government, that they are still not following the precautions that their own government is telling people to take. And that, of course, is wearing facial covering.
3 journalistes de la Maison-Blanche testés positifs à la Covid-19. Plusieurs autres journalistes sont mis en quarantaine par précaution en attendant les résultats des tests. Le représentant des journalistes de la Maison-Blanche a par ailleurs demandé aux journalistes d'éviter la Maison-Blanche pour le moment. Former VP Joe Biden pulls all negative campaign ads suite au diagnostic du président américain. La campagne de Joe Biden a décidé de supprimer toute publicité négative à l'égard de Donald Trump. NBC News' Mike Memoli reports.
Just took off from Grand Rapids here after holding a campaign event in which he largely stuck with his message focused on the economy, but of course on the pandemic, offering his thoughts and prayers for the president and his health, and reminding Americans of their patriotic duty, as he called it, to wear masks, to do everything they can to follow CDC guidance and to ensure everyone's health and safety. Now, the news that we just learned in the last few minutes is that the Biden campaign has made the decision to suspend all negative advertising on the airwaves. The Biden campaign has an awful lot of money to spend on television advertising. They will continue to run positive advertising. But given the president's condition, and especially in light of the announcement that he is going to be spending a few days at least at Walter Reed, the Biden campaign is telling me just in the last few minutes they are suspending all negative advertising. But Shep, this is a campaign that has been operating on, frankly, a crisis footing for months. They have adapted their campaign strategy to the coronavirus. I've been covering the former vice president for 12 years. I've been covering this campaign since it began. Covering him, though, in the last 8 months has meant really often not getting close to him. When I am close to him, it's after being tested, it's after having my temperature taken. So this is a candidate who does not need to change the way he's campaigning, but because he's already done it, Shep.
La décision de retirer les publicités négatives a été vivement critiquée par certains partisans du Parti démocrate. Selon eux, c'était justement, je cite, une carte à jouer. Pour le moment, la campagne de Donald Trump affirme qu'elle n'a pas l'intention de rendre l'appareil. The latest Donald Trump tweets are about his health, but also the stimulus. Depuis sa chambre d'hôpital, le président américain souhaite une continuité. La présidente de la Chambre des représentants des États-Unis, Nancy Pelosi, demande aux compagnies aériennes l'arrêt des suppressions d'emplois. Selon elle, un deal ne devrait pas tarder à être conclu. On écoute.
Well, Tyler, that is one area where the Democrats do agree with the administration, but Pelosi is also now detailing the areas where the Democrats and the White House still remain far apart. In a letter to her caucus, she said there are 5 areas: unemployment insurance, state and local funding, the child tax and earned income tax credits, language on testing and tracing, and other appropriations. Now, Pelosi said that she is expecting a response from the White House on those areas and others with more detail. And in the meantime, she said, we continue to work on the text to move quickly to facilitate an agreement. On MSNBC earlier today, Pelosi said that she hopes Republicans are at an inflection point.
This kind of changes the dynamic because here they see the reality of what we have been saying all along. This is a vicious virus.
Now, House lawmakers have taken their final votes of the day, which means that members are going back home. But, guys, Democratic leadership is warning that they can be called back to Washington at any time if a deal emerges. Back over to you.
Do we know anything about where the Senate stands on any of this? And I guess really the Senate is really a proxy, Elon, for the White House.
Well, the last thing that we heard from Senate leaders was that this Democratic bill was outlandish. But Tyler, I am not so sure that Senate Republicans are a proxy for the White House. The two have been on some different pages, particularly on items like direct payments to families. So right now, this is a deal that's going to be agreed upon between the Secretary and between the Speaker, and then it's going to be up to the White House to try to sell this to Senate Republicans.
Selon Nancy Pelosi, un accord sur une aide supplémentaire de 25 milliards de dollars au secteur en difficulté est imminent. American Airlines et United Airlines ont commencé à licencier 32 000 travailleurs cette semaine. Ils sont prêts cependant à faire machine arrière si le Congrès agit rapidement. Cette aide au Congrès est aussi très attendue par le secteur de la restauration. La moitié des bars et restaurants de New York pourraient fermer définitivement. Reportage de CNBC.
Word today that half of New York City's bars and restaurants may be wiped out permanently in the next 6 months. That's from New York State's chief financial officer. Think of it, 14,000 bars and restaurants just gone. Some of my favorites already are. Crispo was an Italian gem on 14th Street. Daddio served great burgers till 4 a.m. No more. A new government report on the city's troubles is out today. Most bars and restaurants here are small businesses with fewer than 20 employees, and more than half of the workers are immigrants, making on average about $34,000 a year. CNBC's Frank Holland in Harlem now with a business owner who says he might have to shut down for good. Frank.
Well, Shepard, it's certainly a big concern for business owners like this one that you see behind me. He's very concerned about his ability to stay open and stay in business when many of the people who are his customers may lose their jobs.
Culinary creations are what Chef J.J. Johnson prefers to focus on at his restaurant in Harlem. But in recent days, instead of rice recipes, he's been stewing over reports of rising COVID numbers.
Your favorite restaurant might not come back. If there's a second wave for restaurants, that might mean 100% of restaurants close, 80% of restaurants close.
And layoffs that could impact his core customers.
Especially in Harlem, talking about working class America losing their job, that's who supports us. If they don't have a job, we won't be open. It's just that simple.
Small business owners across the nation under pandemic pressure. According to Yelp, from April to September, permanent business closures, they increased by 165%. Amar Espinoza is a bartender who has seen his income fall sharply because of fewer tips. If his restaurant closes, he'd be out of much more than just a job.
If I don't have a job, I got to go back to Mexico, or I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't have a job. I'm an immigrant, so I don't really receive any support, any help.
Katrina Paris-Penn and her husband own a home and lifestyle store that's been hit hard by the lack of tourism.
Things have been hard, and they're going to get harder. And until we get, COVID under control, we are going to have hard times ahead of us.
And Shep, it has been especially hard for low-wage workers, the people who would make your food in a restaurant like the one that Chef JJ opened here. According to the Pew Research Center, nearly half of them have lost their job or had to take a pay cut during the pandemic.
Frank Holland, Uptown, in the big...
Selon un rapport du contrôleur de New York, au cours du prochain semestre, la moitié des restaurants et bars de la ville pourraient mettre la clé sous la porte. Cela représenterait plus de 150 000 emplois. En 2019, le secteur de la restauration de la ville réalisait plus de 27 milliards de dollars de ventes taxées. Un autre secteur durement touché par la crise, le secteur de l'événementiel. Movie theaters are seeking help from Congress to survive. Des dizaines de grands noms d'Hollywood ont envoyé une lettre au Congrès. Ils demandent une aide urgente pour que le cinéma survive.
What do you need for your theaters to keep operating?
Well, it's important to note that the movie theater industry had a record-breaking year in 2019. We were strong before this pandemic. We'll be very strong coming out of this pandemic in 2021. It's just a matter of getting a bridge of liquidity to make it from one side to the other. So what we've been asking Congress for is either a loan program or a grant program that can help particularly our small and mid-sized members, but all theater owners have the liquidity they need to get through the crunch.
But, John, I guess the question is, how long does this bridge need to be? There seems to be no sense of when we'll really see a full return of moviegoing. You have the major studios delaying their biggest releases, even as more than half of theaters remain open, because there just isn't a sense that the demand is there for theaters to be full again. And so how long does that bridge have to be? And do you think at the other end of this, the number of theaters may just be smaller considering the rise of things like streaming?
So we're coming back into business now, right? And there will be a ramp up over the next 4 months. We're open in 48 states across the country, and some or all parts of those states. We're really hoping that Governor Cuomo will allow us to open soon in New York. We can do so very carefully with our cinema safe protocols that ensure a safe movie-going experience. And as we get all those states open, we believe we'll have more movies to play the rest of this year. No doubt the business will not be the same in the last part of 2020 as it was in 2019. But if we get the states open, we have the movies come back, we'll ramp up over the course of the end of this year, and then return to the strong business we had before in 2021.
Hey, John, how do you think the president's diagnosis impacts consumer sentiment around going back to anything, Broadway, a movie, a live concert? And is there a limit to which you think consumers are willing to subject themselves to get into a room? Are we all willing to wait 15 minutes for a swab test result before we go in to see a movie?
Yeah, so I'll take your second question first. We've surveyed our moviegoers extensively over the last couple of months, and there's a large group of them that are ready to come back to the movies now with the right safety precautions, as long as we have good movies in the marketplace. There's a second group that just wants to learn more about the safety protocols and hear what their friends are saying. And there's a third and smaller group that just wants to wait it out until there's a vaccine, right? So what we're trying to do is entice those first two groups to understand that indeed we have the safety protocols in place and they can come back out to the movies. As for the president's diagnosis, watch the stock market fluctuations. I guess the stock market's saying it's not a big deal, seems to be a mild case. The right protocols are in place to govern the country. So I don't think it's going to have much of an impact on people's attitudes about going to the movies or going to restaurants. What's going to have an impact is whether or not they believe that the protocols are in place to keep them safe.
La grande majorité des sociétés de production a subi des pertes de 75% au deuxième trimestre de 2020. Même si la moitié des salles de cinéma sont maintenant rouvertes, le public n'est pas au rendez-vous. Hollywood a donc décidé de retarder ses principales sorties cinéma d'automne. Un plan de vaccination est désormais établi aux États-Unis. US Scientific Advisory Group releases vaccination plan. Le plan donne la priorité aux agents de santé à haut risque, aux prestataires des hôpitaux et aux médecins. Let's hear more on the final framework of a COVID-19 vaccine.
The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine formalizing their guidance for who will get a coronavirus vaccine first once it's approved. Meg Terrell, of course, covers all things vaccine-related for us. Meg.
Hi, David. Well, who gets a vaccine first? It's the frontline healthcare workers. The final guidelines for vaccine distribution coming out from the National Academies today. Here's how they break it down into essentially 4 groups. First, of course, high-risk workers in healthcare, first responders. Phase 1B includes high-risk individuals with underlying conditions, also older adults. That's going to cover 5 to 10% of the population. Then you get into Phase 2, which is about 30 to 35% of the population. That includes K through 12 teachers and school staff, as well as critical workers in high-risk settings like the food supply system and public transit, also people in homeless shelters or group homes, and all older adults who don't fit into that Phase 1 category. Finally, for Phase 3, that's about 40 to 45% of the population. That's young adults, children, and workers in industries like colleges and universities, hotels, banks, exercise facilities, and factories that they say are important to the function of society and also has a moderately high risk of exposure. They put young adults in that category as well because they tend to have broader social circles, and children, even though they are not yet being included in these vaccine trials. So including them with vaccination is dependent on the timing of those data. Finally, Phase 4 covers everybody else, guys. We talked with Dr. Saad Omer this morning from Yale School of Public Health about how they reached these guidelines.
We knew from day one we won't have enough vaccine for everyone from the start. We will eventually, hopefully, get there. So that demands some thinking that's based on science, that's based on bioethics, and other logistical considerations that who comes first. So doing that in a haphazard way is very counterproductive. Doing it systematically and drawing upon previous experiences previous literature in bioethics, in epidemiology, etc., is the way to go.
And guys, to Dr. Omer's point about supply, here is what Operation Warp Speed forecasts will be available by the end of 2020. This, of course, all dependent on any of these vaccines getting clearance from the FDA. David?
Meg, thank you.
Pour la période initiale où la demande de vaccins excède l'offre, le comité scientifique recommande une approche en 4 étapes différentes. Les 2 premières phases seront consacrées au personnel de santé, de la restauration et de l'éducation. Puis les autres phases s'étendront aux personnes à risque, aux SDF et aux prisonniers avant de prendre en charge le reste de la population. Oxford Economics predicts near 7.6% growth for China's economy in 2021. Les autorités chinoises ont intensifié leurs efforts pour passer d'une économie tributaire des exportations à une économie tirée par la consommation intérieure. Oxford Economics Sign Fenner discusses China's economic recovery outlook.
Singapore still looks to be in a fairly good position to provide more stimulus. Indeed, it's actually been one of the countries that has really put the foot on the fiscal pedal this year. And we don't think they're really going to take that fiscal stimulus away anytime soon, particularly given the risks that we're seeing. There are other countries, though, that are sort of struggling for fiscal room. In particular, we're seeing that, for example, Malaysia, the fact that they've already had their debt increase significantly this year, whether or not this could actually, if they continue to provide ongoing fiscal support, if that would actually see foreign investors get a little bit worried in terms of credit rating downgrades. So Singapore is definitely one country that we see that has sort of that fiscal space to, out of all of the countries, to provide more room and support.
Thoughts, too, on China, which has been really the outperformer in the region, and we continue to see some encouraging data points coming out of China. But when you're talking about a growth rate this year of around 1.8%, I mean, that is just such a dramatic change from what we've seen in prior years, and that has implications for the entire region, of course. So as we look ahead, how strong do you think the rebound could be in 2021?
We're looking for something closer to 7.6% next year. So you're right, we are seeing encouraging signs. We've seen exports continue to improve and actually outperform in numerous countries in the region, partly because they're ahead in terms of containing the virus. They had the big drop in Q1. But also there'll be ongoing fiscal support, probably a little bit less on the monetary policy side. But they definitely want to see, domestic demand continuing to improve, and that lag that we've seen in consumption should actually continue to recover, providing greater support both for actually import demand in the region more generally next year.
And as always, though, Sean, I mean, there is a balancing act that has to be conducted in China and other economies in between reflating the economy, providing more support, and making sure the debt risks don't get out of control. Do you think they have a good handle on this?
Yeah, at the moment, I mean, that's partly why we're actually thinking that we're not going to see much more on the monetary policy side in terms of credit growth. There are definitely signs that the recovery domestic demand is picking up, so they're probably not going to. They're going to become more confident of the risks of leverage going forward. And so it's again just going to be making sure there's liquidity in the market and that the recovery is ongoing. Of course, there's a wide range of risks. We still haven't got a vaccine as yet, and I mean even with a vaccine it's being distributed. So the external backdrop remains quite challenging.
Les médias d'État chinois ont annoncé que le comité central du Parti communiste tiendra une réunion clé sur le plan de relance du 26 au 29 octobre. Compte tenu du contexte macroéconomique externe difficile, le nouveau plan quinquennal suivra probablement le thème de la double circulation. Thank you all for being with us. Merci à tous d'avoir participé à ce format 100% hybride. See you very soon for the rest of international news.